Hello, February 12th, and today I'm going to be talking about the Dennis Lynn Rader murderer. He's a killer. He's called the BTK strangler. So now I'm going to give you a little heads up if you're sensitive or you feel you're going to get triggered by any of this. I'm going to be a little bit graphic. I'm going to try not to get into too much detail, but here goes the story, okay? I compiled it together as much as I can, but I'm still figuring out how I'm gonna continue my channel, my storyline, but bear with me and enjoy. Dennis Rader. He was known as the BTK Strangler, which actually he gave himself that name. I'm gonna tell you what it stands for in a minute. He's born in 1945 in Pittsburgh, Kansas. He lived a double life. He was a devoted family member, he was a family man, and by the day he was a family man, but he also terrorized the Wichita, Kansas City. As the BTK killer, that's how he terrorized them. So what does it stand for, the BTK? BTK stands for Bind, Torture, and Kill. Rader grew up in the oldest of four boys. He had a normal childhood. He seemed normal, but people seem to say he had disturbing behaviors, such as taking small stray animals and hanging them upside down. His parents barely paid any attention to him, or his siblings. They were kind of absent parents, so they were kind of a little bit neglected. So Dennis particularly disliked his mother, and he resented being ignored by her. So Dennis had sadistic sexual fantasies. He fantasized about torturing and trapping helpless women. He practiced zoo sadism. I just learned that new term. It means torturing and killing and hanging small animals. He was in the cross-dressing business. He loved to cross-dress. And while he was wearing the cross-dressing women's clothing, he would spy on the female neighbors while dressed that way. He had stolen women's underwear, and I'm getting graphic now, so if you don't want to hear this, then this video is not for you. So he would masturbate with ropes and other bindings in which he would bind himself around his arms and his neck. And in Wichita alone, he killed 10 people. In later years, when he was cooling off between murders, he'd take pictures of himself in women's clothes and had a female mask on. Creepy. While he tied himself up, he'd do this as his sexual fantasies, to pretend to be the female victim. He kept all this hidden from people, so to everyone on the outside, he seemed like a normal guy, your average Joe, how they call it. So people thought he was normal, polite, and well-mannered. We're going back in time now. After his high school, Rader went to a Kansas university. He dropped out 1 year later. He also served in the United States Air Force. Can you imagine? He then moved to Park City. He married, had 2 kids. He then enrolled in college and graduated with a bachelor's degree in administration of justice. Can you imagine all his accomplishments? He worked also, ironically, installing security alarms for people worried about the what did he call himself? The BTK killer. So he's the one that's killing everybody, and he's installing alarm systems for these people that are scared of him. Ironic. So in 1991, he became a dog catcher. That's someone who catches stray dogs. He was known to bully and harass single women. Rader once killed his neighbor's dog for no reason. He attended church and became president of the church council. And imagine that. This guy was up there in society, no one would ever suspect a thing. That's why, I don't, people that are in, authority position, or they're I don't trust anyone, because you never know who's what, So Radar would stalk his victim, calling them each as projects or potential hits. He was so cruel. He broke into a home with the parents and two children, and he forgot to wear his mask. So he tied up all the family. Basically, a few of the family members weren't there, but he didn't know that. But he tied up the two children that were there and the parents, and he killed the parents in front of the children. And then he took the daughter and I'm not going to say what he did to her, but he hung her upside down. And she asked him, "Why are you doing this? What are you going to do to me?" And he said, "Oh, don't worry, honey. You're going to join your parents now in heaven." That's what he told. That's how cruel he was. So, he basically murdered the kids because he hadn't worn a mask, and now they would be able to ID him. They'd be able to identify him. So he said he had to get rid of them. So he strangled them. He'd first find a potential victim to match his fantasy, then hone in on them. He had a special hit kit used for the murders, such as special clothing, which he'd wear during the murders, and then he would get rid of them when he finished a murder. He would throw them out. Or keep them, I'm guessing. At random, he chose a 26-year-old woman named Shirley Vian. Got to her apartment, he forced his way in, and he forced her to lock her two children up in the bathroom, and then the kids were watching through the peephole, and he put a bag over her head, and he strangled her to death. So this, all that I'm telling you now, he describes happily to the judge. Like, he's very proud of what he's done. He's very proud of his accomplishments as a murderer. No shame, no remorse, nothing. A real psychopath. People that had seen him, like, he got caught in the act, right? And like people who survived the murder or whatever, they described him as having like psychotic eyes. So he detailed each killing to the judge, and in general, predators love that because they relive the pleasure of every murder and everything. They relive it, and in some form, over and over again. I won't continue detailing each murder because it was just too much for me personally, and it got me nauseous, and it's just how cruel he was. I got upset, so I don't know. I can't. I decided not to go into it. So for years, this Dennis, he would taunt the police and the families before and after. Like, he would taunt the police and the families, and he would send them. He would take pictures of before and afters of the victim, and then he would send it to the police and the families. At one point, he described in writing how he killed the O'Terrace family, the family I told you about, who he killed the little girl, hung her upside down and killed her, and killed the parents in front of them. So he described the killing of the families, and he stashed it. He wrote it down, how he killed on a paper, and he stashed it inside the book in the Wichita Public Library in a book. He then called the local paper and told them where to find his confession. That's how sick he was. So Dennis Rader's wife has seen suspicious behaviors, but never connected the pieces. She never connected. She didn't say anything when her husband Dennis marked up newspaper stories on the serial killer with what he called his own secret code. So she never questioned him. She saw suspicious behavior, but she never put it two and two together. Like, who would think, their own husband is capable of such. So he called it his own secret code. She also noticed that the letters that he'd previously sent to her, like, their love letters or whatever, it had the same misspelling as the killer, the BTK killer. It had the same misspellings of the letters that the BTK killer had sent to the media and the police and the newspapers. So she once said to him, "You spell just like BTK." She didn't ask him about a sealed box he kept in their home. She never looked inside. So he had this box that he sealed inside the house, and he never looked inside. And she never looked inside, but it had all his stuff in there. If she had looked inside, she would have found a treasure chest of horrors which Dennis offered, which which Dennis referred to as the Motherlode. It contained mementos from the BTK killer's crime scenes, dead women's underwears, driver's licenses, along with pictures of him dressed up in his victim's underwear, choking himself and burying himself alive, reenacting the ways he'd killed his victims. Either his wife was in denial or just crazy, but when she found out who Dennis was, she insisted he is a good man, a great father who would never hurt anyone. So her kids never suspected him. Ironically, he used to soothe his daughter's worries at night when she was worried about the BTK killer. Can you imagine? His daughter is terrified and it's her own father. After committing his last murder, Dennis came across the local paper in which marked the anniversary of the Otero murders. Remember that family he killed with the two kids and the mother and the father? So he came across it in the local paper in which it marked the anniversary of the murders. And he wanted to make the BTK killer known again. So this happened 30 years before. And in 2004, he sent nearly a dozen letters taunting police and media and sending packages to them and letters. And some of the letters were like mementos of his massacres, what he'd done. Others were horrific, like he would take like dolls and he would like stuff the mouth with like I don't know what, like really horrific stuff. And I didn't want to tell you the details because it's just too disturbing. So, but the one that got Dennis caught was a letter on a floppy disk. Inside, police found the metadata of a deleted Microsoft Word document. It was a document for the Christ Church, authored by the church council president, Dennis Rader. Because remember, he was the president of the church council. So DNA samples were taken from one of the victim's nails that he'd killed, from her fingernails, and police got access to Dennis's daughter's pap smear to confirm a match, like a familiar match. You know, they can do that with DNA. When they received the positive match, Rader was arrested in front of his family in 2005. Dennis tried keeping up a reassuring face, gave his daughter one last hug, promising it would all be cleared up soon. But once in custody, his mask fell off. He didn't hide a thing. He confessed to all the murders in detail, was sentenced to 175 years behind bars without the ability of parole. Basically, they didn't give him the death penalty because at the time in Kansas, they didn't have the death penalty enacted, so he didn't get it, unfortunately. I think he should have. But, so he told them he was sentenced without the possibility of parole, and he was 60 at the time. Dennis, his wife, when he got arrested, Dennis's wife left her meal half eaten on the dinner table. When her husband was arrested, she would never finish it. When she found out who he really was, she refused to set foot into that house again that she lived in for so many years with him. She divorced Rader when he confessed his crimes. The family was hit hard. Imagine, like, this is their father who was, like, putting on this facade of being this, like, amazing everything, and they were so shocked, you know? At the end of the day, his children were his children. And as his daughter wrote in a letter to her father, and I'm going to quote now, she wrote, "Should I tell you that I grew up adoring you, that you were the sunshine of my life? I just wished you were sitting here next to me in the theater, sharing a tub of buttered popcorn, but you're not. You won't ever have this again. Was it worth it?" End quote. So his daughter actually wrote an autobiography called The Daughter of a Killer, you know? And I mean, this is all pretty tragic story, but at the same time, it's kind of like I'm still figuring out what genre I'm gonna do for my storytelling sessions. I hope it was clear enough, I hope it was interesting and clear enough, and have a good night.